Hey everyone, Adam here, So Is Your Podcast. I have another interview for you today. This is a really cool one, really fun one. I got to talk to Deuces from the Geekset Podcast. I'm calling it the Geekset Podcast Network, just kind of where my mind goes, because these guys have so much going on, and they're actually making a documentary now. Their podcast blends geek culture and hip-hop. They kind of target the blerd audience, but it's for everybody. It's not just for the blerds. Really cool guy, really cool group of guys. They have a ton going on, as I mentioned. The documentary they're doing sounds really cool, and Deuce is going to do a better job explaining it than I will, so enjoy the interview. Hey everyone, Adam here, So Is Your Podcast. I'm sitting down with Deuces from the Geekset Podcast, and I think it's Geekset Podcast Network, is it? It seems like you're doing a lot.
Well, you know what? We haven't officially called ourselves a network, but I guess so. Yeah, we're doing a whole bunch.
Okay, well, I guess that's probably a good place to start. So why don't you tell everybody not only what Geekset is, but also all the things you have going on? Because I read the email we got like a handful of times, and it's like, man, these guys are busy.
Yeah. So we go by the Geekset Podcast, the only podcast that blend hip-hop culture and geek culture together. And we wanted to jump into the geek space just to be that representation of a Black geek. Because the one thing that, and you know what's funny is that it translates not only just to the Black geek, but to all geeks. But it's just something that, we identify with, is just being able to, we see the Steve Urkels or, the Carltons, and like they always make them the butt of the jokes. Now, even though we still love these characters, but it was like they're always the butt of the jokes. They can't get the guy or the girl. They're socially awkward. And it was like, yeah, that's a form of geek, but that's not. I run across more geeks like me and you, Adam, where it was like, I'm gonna just say we're cool, man. Like it's like we're not socially awkward. We can be at a bar, we can have a good time. You can put us in a room, we'll flourish, we'll network. Like it's that, and I wanted to be that. I wanted to show that swagger of a Black geek, that hip hop, and this, that we also bring, because one of our jokes that we often say is that when you hear us debate like Batman versus Superman or Goku versus Naruto, it sounds like we're debating Jordan versus LeBron. It's that barbershop talk, like, and so it's like, we wanted to bring that to the geek world. And so we started off as just the podcast, and then we started like going to conventions, talking to people of the culture, and then we started interviewing celebrities. Then we started doing original content, and now we're doing a documentary.
Very cool. Yeah, it's awesome how it just kind of grew and grew and grew.
Yeah. And that's why we said we never called ourselves a network yet, but like now that, in retrospect, looking at it, is like, yeah, we're pretty much doing network things.
Right, that's where you're going. When you started, was it just you or you and a friend, or was it the whole, because it looks like you have 5 or 6 people on board now?
Yeah, so it's 4 of us. So when it first started, it was only 3 of us. So what happened was I did a Facebook post, like always, and it was like, hey, man, I want to do a podcast, right? And, I wanted to do a podcast about like a year before like the podcast explosion happened. And it was going to be like a general topic podcast, right? Where I talk about, just like, what all the other podcasts talks about, right? And I couldn't find a co-host at the time. So when that happened, I said, all right, I just kind of let it go. But my thirst for wanting to do a podcast never left. So then I did a Facebook post and I said, look, I got this idea to blend hip-hop culture and geek culture. Now I'm based out of Milwaukee. I'm also a artist. So, when I posted it, somebody tagged Bacardi, which is one of my other co-hosts. And I'd known Bacardi for quite some time throughout the Milwaukee music scene. So I was like, oh, okay. And I know he was a geek, because even before I wanted to dive into this, I would see him on like Halloween dressed up but his Halloween looked more like cosplay. It didn't look like just like a regular, like, oh, I just went to, the store that got a pop-up shop and bought me a costume. Like, his was more like cosplay. So I already knew where he was at. And then Lib, which is my other podcast host as well, he jumped in and said, yeah, and I'll be to do like this and talk about this. And he's another person, like his first album that he did in Milwaukee, he's a producer. It was called the Wade Wilson Project, and so, he was like he's a huge Deadpool fan. So when I saw them too, I said, you know what? I don't want to go through the woes of learning a new co-host. Like, I was like, So I was like, I know them two already. We just never talked about this in extent. I said this would be easy for us to put together. So then like that weekend we got together, we had steaks and whiskey, and we figured out what our niche is going to be, what we're going to talk about. And then the following Sunday we did our first podcast, and then the rest has been history. And probably like after like 45 or like 50 episodes, Didge, which is my brother, he was a stand-in engineer. We needed additional engineer to help us out record the podcast. But like most podcasts who have an engineer or a man behind the scenes, they eventually end up getting a mic, and then they eventually end up getting on camera.
Every time.
Every time. And so that's like, that's what happened with Didge. And then, and so then we became the 4-man crew that we see today.
Very cool. That's awesome. Yeah. It's always interesting to see how these things start.
Yeah. And it's been a fun journey, because it's like, when we started it, we just wanted to be a podcast to talk about geek stuff, right? And it wasn't until probably like halfway, like after the second year, that we started like leaning into like, you know what, we're actually can be a voice. Like we can actually be a voice. And we want to start using our platform a little bit more responsibly, and not necessarily changing what we do, but just like making sure that like, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do it at like at a good level. Let's make sure that we're putting time into the production. We're investing in the quality, because now we have people who want to hear from us. And now we are established on ourselves as being a voice for a specific culture or specific part of geek culture. And it was like, okay, so let's represent. Let's make sure that when people see Geekset, they're like, yo, wow, yeah, this is very impressive. And they want to hear more about what we're doing and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good that you found the niche that you were looking to fill.
Yeah.
Now, going back a little bit, you had mentioned that you knew your first two co-hosts from your music scene.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you're blending hip-hop culture and geek culture. So were you part of the music scene, or you just like had seen them perform maybe, or like what was your involvement there?
Oh yeah, I'm part of the music scene as well. I'm an artist. I was part of a group called Streets and Young Deuces. We used the acronym SNYD to represent who we were. But yeah, we had and still, because like we still every now and then do music and put it out. But yeah, we're pretty established in the city of Milwaukee.
Do you blend the geek into the music, or is it kind of two things that you just love both of them?
So at first I didn't, but over my last two albums I did, because it's a weird space, because there's a lot of people in Milwaukee who know me strictly from music, but then now there's a lot of people in Milwaukee who only know me for podcasts and being on on different shows and stuff like that. So I'm like, my worlds, they haven't combined until last year during the pandemic. It was like, I'm going to start doing a whole bunch, because, during the pandemic, we all started like joining different communities. We're doing virtual like happy hours and stuff like that. And so I was part of this one collective. It was called Urban Anime Lounge. And it was just like, it started off as a Facebook group. They got a Discord, and we would be in there just, sharing ideas, talking about anime, talking about just different things. But every now and then they'll run these contests where there's like, oh, we're going to do like a freestyle, but the topic is you're a Dragon Ball Z character. And I'm like, well, I could do that. And so I record it, put it out there. And so I'm like, wow, and I was getting a really great response from it. And I'm just like, so yeah, now my worlds are combining. Now I'm bringing in the hip hop and the geek elements of my personal life, and not only just from the podcast. So yeah.
I feel like, probably largely in thanks to like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and, Star Wars, I think is more mainstream than ever, even including in the 70s.
Right.
I feel like it's the perfect time for you to blend the geek and the hip hop, if never before now.
Well, I often tell people right now, no matter whatever business you have, if it doesn't incorporate some type of fandom, whether it's a graphic novel, a comic book, like anime, video game reference, or it doesn't have some type of hip hop elements, you're going to fail. I feel like everything has it, no matter what, whether it's the beat, the style of talk, the way that people dress, the graffiti, the tone, there's hip hop elements in it. But then, like I said, every major movie is based off of a graphic novel. It's based off of a comic book. It's based off of it. Like it's very rare that you'll go in a store that you don't see something Marvel, Star Wars, Harry Potter, like it's everywhere, the world. But what's so lovely about it is that both cultures, hip hop culture and geek culture, were shunned. There was a point in time that if you were a geek, you got made fun of. There was a point in time that it was socially awkward to see like people were like, what, those cosplayers? It was a certain time where hip hop was like, what, yeah, you like, that's like, no, that's not music. That's not a genre. So it was like, both of us, we have like it's like we're cousins, like geek culture and hip hop culture, and I think that that's why we mesh so well. Because even if you think about it, even prior to the term blerd coming out, even in geek culture, like you said, there's been times where a geek, like, you know, you'll see somebody who's heavy into D&D, but like the music that they're listening to is like super boom bap underground hip hop. It's, you know, Immortal Technique, Tech Nine, or whatever the case. So it's like those elements has always blended. It's like over the past 5-6 years, maybe even a little bit longer, but now both of those cultures run hand in hand. It's like, oh yeah, it's like we see each other and we just like, yeah, we're together, man. Like, yeah, we're in this together. And I love that two cultures that were shunned are now the top cultures in the world.
That's a really good point, because if you start looking back at the origins of anything you would consider geek, it always kind of went hand in hand with the counterculture music of the day.
Yeah.
Like Marvel was always into the psychedelic kind of stuff, like throughout the 60s, and then they'd get into like the hard rock stuff, and like the foundings of D&D are all over, you know, Lord of the Rings popularity in the 70s, and like Led Zeppelin gets on board. So
right. And then, like, you know, even if you go back, like if you think about some of like some of the big hip hop groups, Wu-Tang Clan is probably the biggest hip hop group in the world, and they've always had kung fu elements. They've always had comic book elements. You know, like Ghostface. His name is Ghostface. He got we got MF Doom that's out here who got the Doom mask. Like, it's always been there subtly. I feel like now we're just all waving those flags proudly.
Yeah, it's not so subtle. You know, the Method Man had a Marvel produced podcast.
Right. And so like, I love that, man. I love that about both cultures. And that's why I'm so excited about the things that we're doing, because, and this is the one thing that has been weird to me. I feel like so anytime that there's something that's like, okay, this is the broad spectrum, but then you start creating subgenres of it. It's a lot of times, sometimes it does get met with like a specific level of hate, right? Like, oh, why do we have to classify black versus white, right? But the funny thing about this journey that I've been on and that I've been seeing is that because blerd culture, which is a black nerd, also we have to highlight and show love to geek culture. Geek culture has not did that to us, or I have not experienced that. I have not seen where, you know, like, granted, there are trolls that do it, you know, like, and I know recently there's been a lot of people upset about, you know, there's a artist who drew an anime character, made the character black and stuff like that. But that's the minimum, because for the most part, I've seen the embracement of it. I've seen a lot of people like, oh man, that's so cool. Like, I like that, you know, they like, because you got to think fan fiction is nothing but that. And fan fiction is like, once you start diving into fan fiction, you are truly in geek culture. That's like one of those things. Like, it's like there's like elements of it. It's like, yeah, okay, you're a geek, you know, because there's different levels, there's different tiers. You're a geek and everything, and it's like, but it was like, yeah, once you start diving into cosplay, it's like, oh, it's like badges. Like, oh, you unlock the new badge, you unlock, you know, the achievement on PlayStation. Now you're a cosplayer. Oh, now you're doing tabletop games. Oh, now you got the new badge that you can add. Or, you know, so it's stuff like that. And so I think that, like, you know, the geek culture, you know, and especially Japanese animation, you know, as well, like, I feel like the love has been reciprocated back and forth from, you know, no matter what walk of life that you are. You know, I've been seeing more people highlighting more people of color, people from the LGBTQ community, the original geeks, the Japanese animation, American animation. Like, I just love geek culture because of that. And I think it's because, again, it goes back to that culture has been shunned. Where it was a moment, like, you know, like I said, that you even like popular shows. There was that episode of Simpsons where you literally heard Homer yell out "nerd" to the geek, but again, when you see the nerd in Simpsons, it's the stereotypical geek. It's not the Adams. It was the Poindexter, hey guy, and stuff like that. So knowing that now we have that representation of you can have a young Deuces, you can have an Adam, you can have a King Vader, you can have somebody, a top tier actor like Michael B. Jordan saying he loves Naruto and anime, and it's like, oh no, it's no more classification. We have geeks all over and everything, and I think that's why the love, no matter what subgenre comes from geek culture, it's still love across the board.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really good way to sum it all up, really. Do you find is the blerd subculture very different than the geek culture, or is it just kind of a way of, for people like you to say, this is our space? Because it seems to me, I'm trying to word this properly, sorry.
Oh, yeah. No
it seems to me that, like, you go to a Comic-Con and you see, you know, a group of black kids hanging out, and they're totally accepted with the group of kids over here, all dressed like anime characters, and they're all accepted by the stormtroopers. You know, it seems like it all meshes.
Yeah. So I would say exactly what you said. It is like a beacon. It's just it's kind of like you said, it's like, oh, okay, I know who you are, you know who I am in regards to that. But I would say the I guess the major difference is just like the cultural references, right? Now, again, there's a whole lot of subgenres in regards, like you have like gender bending cosplay, right? Where it's like, okay, this character is Vegeta, but I'm gonna do it a woman version of Vegeta, you know, and that's the gender bending cosplay. But where like a lot of blerd culture comes from, because during Black History Month we did a video. We did a series called like, what does Black History Month mean to you? And we talked to 30 blerds across the world. But one of the questions that we asked was, Black History Month plus blerd culture, what's the first thing that comes to mind? So like a word association. In the conversations and the responses that we have, I think it sums up what blerd culture is a lot. So it's like when you see certain things, like you see artwork and you see Superman, but like he's dressed up in like today's hip hop clothing that you see the kids wear and stuff like that. They got Supreme. He has like the bag on, like it's stuff like that, or stuff like, you know, like there's a stormtrooper. I wish I remember his name, but there's a stormtrooper who pays homage to Run DMC.
I think so he called the Hip Hop Trooper.
You've seen him before, right? Like he has
the red,
like the red is like with the Adidas stripe, but it's stuff like that is like, it's blerd culture. It's stuff like that where we see it like, oh, they're blending cultures. They're bringing in that swagger of hip hop into the fandom of Star Wars, fandom of Marvel, whatever like that. I think that's one of the identifiers in regards to that. But then it's also just like identifying with specific characters and saying like, oh, this character seems like this person is of Black culture. Like, you know, a common joke is like Piccolo of Dragon Ball Z. I'm not sure if you're a Dragon Ball Z fan, but yep. Piccolo, they always say Piccolo and the Namecs are Black, you know, and it was like because of like just the demeanor, the swagger that he has. But it's stuff like that is like it's not a written rule. Nobody confirmed it, but like a specific group of people, you know, the Black culture, we identify that as that, you know, even to where people have made books, think pieces about it and everything. So it's that added flair to it. It's that added, you know, those added elements of hip hop to it. That's what contributes to blerd culture, but also identifying as a Black geek who can dive deep into it, right? Because, you know, that's the one thing about geek culture that I love, is that when you are a fandom of something, you dive deep into it, right? And so again, you know, the term geek has evolved. It's not a dig, because we have people who are beer geeks who can tell you everything that goes into this beer and why this beer is good. I always say sports, you know, Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharp, they're sports geek, because we can say that, yo, I like Steph Curry and I like Giannis, but they're going to tell you the reasons why Steph Curry and Giannis are good, you know, break it down to the PR, the shot, you know, precision and everything. So it's like, I love how geek in the term evolved to that, so that way that we can identify like, okay, a geek is just somebody who can go in on a specific topic. And so, you know, when we're talking about blerd culture and like the subgenre of nerd culture, it's just like, I think it's just identify like, I'm a Black nerd, I can go in about this topic, but also here's what I bring to the community. Here's what I add to nerd and geek community to add, my stamp, to add my identity to it.
That's very cool. That's a very, again, great explanation. So all this stuff, it seems like it's all coming to a point where now you have a documentary coming.
Yep.
And so the documentary is on everything you're talking about right here.
It is. Yep. So it is. And then it's also talking about the future on what's the move, because again, I don't ever want to take away what we saw in early nerd, culture. Like I said, I use Urkel and Carlton and stuff like that. But during that time, we also got the Black Ranger. We also got Static Shock. And it's one of those things. It was like, I love these properties, but I always gravitated towards, you always want to gravitate towards somebody who looks like you. So we gravitate towards those, and universally through these conversations that I'm having with people, those are those starts. Everybody has like the same origin base. So I want to talk about, we came up with the idea as a team, like we haven't timelined the Black Geek yet. Like there's so many documentaries and everything about just different areas of geek culture. You got the Star Wars documentary, Marvel, Stan Lee, DC, toys that made us, movies that made us. There's a whole lot, but I was like, there hasn't been anything that definitively timeline being Black and being a geek. And I said, I would love to be a part of that. And we talked with my team, and we were like, yeah, why don't we do it? Let's take our shot at it. And we was like, we've been fortunate enough to interview some really dope celebrities, some people, some heroes of ours, talking with people like Phil Lamar and talking with people like Deborah Wilson and, like top tier, like nerds who've been nerds from way back in the day when there wasn't really like a blurred culture, right? But then also talking to the movers and shakers of today, like King Vader and what he's doing, or Pierre Steps, or Crystal Chanel, like talking to a lot of people that are blurs that are moving the culture now. So I said, the theme of it, we've been calling this a love letter to the blurred culture, because we want to focus on, we want to celebrate our heroes, but we also want to talk about the misrepresentation on that, making the Black geek socially awkward, making them, not, but then also talking about how we change that narrative, how hip hop and blurred culture and elements of Black culture has been embedded into geek culture now, how it intertwined, how it helped move the culture as well, and then also talk about what's to come. What do we see in the future and everything? And what I'm excited about is that it's going to be a collaborative effort, like the way that we mapped it out, because I'm big on giving people opportunities and amplifying voices. So some of the people that we've already interviewed are going to be on-screen talent, but we're excited about working people into the fold behind the scenes as well, right? Because, just any good documentary is going to require research. And so we're building a research team that consists of other cosplayers, other podcasters, a couple of hosts and everything like that. That's part of blurred culture, right? And then, there's a lot of people who reached out like, hey, you know what? I do this type of, effect work in After Effects. I would love to help you guys there. Or, somebody reaching out like, hey, I'm a PR. I would love to be a part of the official rollout of this, right? And so like I'm super excited to kind of just have these collaborative efforts and stuff like that. And what I love about it is we have a good spectrum of people behind the scenes that's going to be working with us as well. So it's like, even though this is called the Black Geek documentary, we have people of all walks of life that are going to be helping us out put this together. And I think that, to me, that has let me know that this is something that needs to be told, because anytime that you can start rallying people together and for a cause, and like I said, we're not the first people that's in Black, blurred culture, but I feel great that this is going to be a pivotal moment in it. The way that I see it, it's going to be the first time that it's timeline, and then to see everything that comes after it, whether it inspires somebody to do a better documentary, or inspires somebody to do an actual movie or a show that's based on, we had Big Bang Theory, which was like in geek culture, that was like chef's kiss to have Big Bang Theory, right? And so it's like just to have something like that. But let's say maybe there's two black led characters in this show, but they're nerds. But like, but now it's not necessarily like the Big Bang Theory nerds. It's the regular. It's the different nerd. It's the nerd that me and you are talking about right now. That nerd that is like, you know what? All right, this is not a nerd that that may get joked upon, but this is the cool nerd, right? This is the nerd that's partying, who's at the cosplay convention party it's going down, and it's the nerd that you want to be, the nerd that you're like, you know what? I kind of want to be this nerd. This nerd pretty cool, man. It's like, so it's like, having that, like, I would love, like, I think that this is going to be one of those things that does that.
That's hugely ambitious, but also really cool. And I think it's really interesting that you have so many angles to get in on this.
Mm-hmm. Well,
like sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah. And I think that that's it too, because I think that it's when I tell people the premise, just even of our podcast, like this, when I first told people the premise of our podcast, I took like the Lil Wayne approach. I don't know how much you're familiar with Lil Wayne and his music, but at some point, Lil Wayne started calling himself the best rapper alive. Now, in my eyes, it's Jay-Z. Universally, it was always Tupac and Biggie, before they passed away. But Lil Wayne was not considered the best rapper alive. But he went on this run of calling himself that, saying that, and he got like remarkably better with his music, his lyricism, and everything like that, to the point where it became argumentative. And there was a point of period of time where definitively he was claimed, and it was like, yes, Lil Wayne is the best rapper alive. So when I was like, you know what? Let's call ourselves the only podcast that blend hip hop culture and geek culture together. Now we are not the only podcast that do it. There's so many podcasts that do it, but we were the ones that definitively said we are that. And we said it for the past 5 years, and people started buying into it and started giving us their trust. Right. But the biggest thing about it is when I was having conversations with, like I said, we started going to a whole lot of comic book conventions, C2E2, Crunchyroll Expo, Anime Expo, and we cover it. We take our camera, we do interviews, and we focused a lot on interviewing the convention goers, because I was like, I want to talk to the culture. I want to talk to the people, and having that conversation, just even saying our spill, the only podcast that blend hip hop culture and geek culture together. People were like, oh man, yo, I love that. I want to check that out. And I was like, man, the response that we are getting, it's always the response of like, yo, like, I didn't think about this. And I know that there's out there. So I was like, this angle, I think that it just hasn't been stamped. There's a lot of people there, but it hasn't been centralized. And like, one of my biggest ambitious goals is to be that. I feel like with the support that Geekset, that we are getting from geek culture and blerd culture, and just the people that are in podcast space, I feel like we have a unique opportunity to help bring blerd culture to another level, to help funnel new talent, amplify new voices. And it was like, one of my ambitious goals is to do that. Like, I have this dream that a magazine reaches out to me and say, hey, we want to do a cover story on Geekset. We'll put you on the cover. And I'm like, hey, you know what would be a better story? And I name off these like 5 other blurs and say, bring them in. Let's do a whole cover story about blerd culture. So it's not just focus on Geekset. We'll be like, it's us and these other 5 blurs that are doing their thing. And we do a whole cover story about blerd culture. And we do that. Like, these are the ambitious goals that I see. It's not more so just how can we get Geekset at a higher level? It's like, how can I push the culture? How can I push blerd culture and geek culture? And I say both of them, exclusively, because it's like, I'm very passionate about amplifying Black geeks and Black nerds, but I love and respect everything about geek culture. So I don't want to only amplify blerds. I want to amplify the culture in general. I want the Soul Wizard podcast to be like, yo, I'm not a blerd, but I love everything Geekset is doing and I support it. And for us to come back like, hey, you know what? You got to make sure you rock with Soul Wizard podcast as well too. Like, I want that, and I think that we have that opportunity to help and contribute to that.
Yeah, that's really cool. You mentioned get a write up in a magazine. You kind of did, weren't you, in Forbes?
Yes, yep.
So that's a big magazine to get into.
Yep. So and it's still surreal because for the most part, my first love has been music. And I operated majority of my life doing music and trying to make it in the music industry. And I got some really good accomplishment, opened up for some some big name artists. We were in some magazines, the Source XXL. So we had some good accomplishments, but never made Forbes for my music. And so I was like, and we made Forbes for being a geek. I said that to somebody. I said, it's funny that my most biggest accomplishment is for me being a geek. And what I even like about that is that it was like I thought it was just going to be like a quick paragraph, a quick, hey, look at what this is. There are these black geeks. They're doing this. This is pretty cool. But it was like a whole expose. It was like a whole thing. And I was like, yo, this is really cool. And it was like, it's still so real to say that we are in for talking about being a geek and talking about being black nerds. Like it's still fresh in my mind. It's still weird to say.
It's really cool though.
Yeah.
Did you see a big uptick in your audience when that came out?
You know what? In the audience, and I think that it helped people see that that we're serious about this, because we announced the documentary in the Forbes magazine interview, and there was a lot of people that we already respected, that we already work with, or that we talked to, but there was a lot of people that also just reached out and said, hey, what do you need? How can I help? And again, being on that independent grind, you don't see that often, in music, especially. Like, there was always a crab in the bucket mentality. It was always a scenario where it felt like my accomplishment in music, if I did this, and let's say somebody was in the same realm as me, they looked at my accomplishment as a threat to their path, right? So it wouldn't be like they wouldn't big up, they wouldn't show support. It was like it was just like weird energy. But within geek culture, it's been the complete opposite. Like, we got more support from other podcasts, and more support from other geeks, and more support from other entities and websites and conventions and people behind the scene. And it was just so, like I said, that's why I think it adds to the surrealness of being in the force, because it was like it amplified it. It was like the best way to say, hey, we're doing a documentary and we're doing it seriously. Because another thing is that we also had the opportunity that we interview people via Zoom StreamYard, like how me and you are doing it. And we could have did it that way, but I said, I don't want to cut corners. I want to really do an actual full length. Like, I'm very inspired by the Toys That Made Us. I love what they did with the Toys That Made Us. And I said, so I was like, I want to do it actually. I want to not cut corners. So we created a budget based off of what our director suggested, and everything like that. And just to be able to see people actually supporting it, people just like, yo, I this needs to be happening, and seeing the comments and seeing the kudos, and people like, this is something that needs to be like, it's really dope. And I'm super excited about that. And so it's like, yeah, I think that was the biggest impact of that interview with Forbes, is just that I think people's like, okay, this is not just somebody saying that they're going to do it. This is actually a collective that is passionate about it. And I actually like their story. And now I want to see if there's any way that I can help out.
That's a really good point that I hadn't considered. Is it probably does, people who don't know you, it does make you seem like, okay, they're serious. They're doing it. They've been doing it. Because, I mean, throw a stick now, you're going to hit somebody who has a podcast. But what does that mean? Does it mean they have like 4 downloads, or does it mean they have this podcast that's growing into a network and making a documentary?
Yeah. And, and it's funny because, like, if we would have did this post-pandemic, we would have had a specific hurdle that we would have had to overcome, because we didn't start interviewing people until the pandemic. What happened was, when the pandemic hit and the world started shutting down, we had a team meeting, and we was like, we don't want to lose steam. At that point, we were only doing like articles on our website, the podcast, and going to conventions. That was our main 3 focus. And the goal was, let's get this live podcast popping so that way we can go city to city, do live podcast. That was our main thing, right? But then the world shut down and we were like, okay, what else can we do? And one of the things, so I led this one when I was like, I am very interested in content creators. I watch a lot of podcasts and I see a lot of things that are people that are on the come up, or I see a lot of people working what they're working. I was like, I would love to interview and deep dive with these people. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to start an interview series on Geekset and I'm going to interview people. That'll be an additional show that we did. Right. But at that time, like I said, we was probably like 3-4 months into the pandemic. And I said, but everybody's doing stuff through Zoom, right? And I said, I want to give it an identity. I don't want it to just be the black screen and 2 screens. Let me give it an identity. So I created a layout and everything. And I said, I want it to look like a versus. So the first one I did, when I did the first season of the interview series I did, it was like a flat version of like Street Fighter versus screen, right? But it gave it an identity. It made it look like something, and people started catching on. So then, as it evolved, like season 3 of the interview series, I made it. I said it looks more like Street Fighter Alpha. It had like moving stuff on it. It was like a little bit more smooth, more heavy focused on the grays and the reds. And then season 4, I made it look like Mortal Kombat 2. In season 5, where we're currently at, I made it look like Tekken. So it was like I'm giving it these identities, but it makes it stand out, and but it was like as we started going and interviewing, we started off with just content creators. Then I got like my first big name person that I got was Timothy De La Ghetto, which is huge in the content creator space. But then that led to me getting like Van Lathan from TNZ. But what I loved about interviewing these people is like I said, I wanted to be, we're going to focus on geek stuff, right? Because I said, you can go anywhere and get Van Lathan's story and Timothy De La Ghetto's story. And I said, though I'm still get their stories, I want to talk about geek stuff. And then I started realizing that everybody has a little geek in them, right? And so I started getting bigger names and stuff like that, where I would interview people that are not necessarily in the geek world, but have them geek out. And that became the niche for the interviews. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to interview Jay Ellis during the final season of Insecure. And everybody's going to talk about, oh, what is him and Issa going to get back together and talk about that. But we have a whole 30-minute segment talking about his love for DC, how he would love to play Blue Beetle, how he would, and stuff like that. And I was like, see, this is an element that you're not going to get anywhere else, because when you talk to certain people who maybe not be a geek in it, or they're just like dipping their toe in the geek world, say, who's your favorite superhero? Yeah, they're going to say Batman, Superman, but he pulled out Blue Beetle. I said, if you know Blue Beetle, you really are into the comics, right? And so I was like, I love that. I love that. And so being able to have those celebrities and have that track record, right? And now saying that we're doing a documentary and reaching back out to some of these celebrities and saying like, yeah, no, I would love to talk about the experience on a documentary, right? So now we're, like I said, this is what empowered us to do this, because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have had those connects. And now that we got those connects, we have the history of us being in geek and blerd culture. So we have the history. Now we have actual talent. That Hollywood would be like, whoa, you guys got this person that's going to talk on camera about it, right? So now we got the talent. Now our director, who's been established in the industry of filming. Now we also have an experienced film director, and then now we also have the support of the culture. Now both like blerd culture, geek culture, they're down. They want to work with us. They want to see this come. And now, like, so it's like we have all the elements. The only thing that's missing is the funding. So when we came to that realization, I said, let's put it into motion. Let's crowdfund. But we're still taking meetings. We're talking with other people to see if we can get some get the full funding for that outside of the crowdfunding. But then, like I said, using the crowdfunding, the people that support, repurposing our Patreon and saying like, hey, we're going to use all of this with like everything is going towards the documentary, and also everybody who has donated, we're going to find some way to celebrate you guys on the actual official documentary. Like, it's funny because going through this process, one of the biggest things I'm excited about It's the end credits. I'm so excited to tell somebody, hey, so we use that. So you are now in the credits. So look for your name in the credit. I'm excited to give somebody that news because I know that even like for me, if somebody was to say, hey, Deuces, yo, we used the clip for Geekset. We're putting this in the documentary. So look out for the credit. That's gonna be huge for me. Like I'm like, oh my God, I'm in a movie. I'm in this. Like it's one of those things. So like I'm excited to have that moment to give somebody that moment in the culture. Like again, like I said, I get it. I feel like my purpose is to amplify people, right? Like I came to this realization probably like 4 or 5 years ago. I said I get a high out of supporting people's dreams, out of helping people, get an opportunity that they didn't have before. Because I know I'm a dreamer myself, and I know that there's more people in this world that's going to tell you no. And I made a decision to say I would never be the person to shoot somebody's dream down. I don't care if you're 80 years old and you're like, you know what? I think I want to record an album. Hey, go do it. I would love to hear it. Or if you're, you're 50 years old and you want to like, oh, I want to go back to school. You know what? Do it. You get that degree, and same thing about just like amplifying voices. If you're somebody who, hey, I just do podcasts. Have you ever thought about, repurposing your clips for something big? No. Well, guess what? I'm going to use 10 seconds of this clip. I'm going to get you a good credit, stuff like that. Like I love being able to create that for people. It's one of my purposes in life that I believe in. So I'm super excited about that.
Very cool. You mentioned a few times crowdfunding, and I see you have a GoFund thing behind you. Do you want to, give a plug? And
So on our website, I mean, you can go to geeksetpodcast.com. You can go to any social media at Geekset Podcast or at young_Deuces for me personally. But we have a GoFundMe, and the GoFundMe, like I said, we don't have any specific tiers. So there's numerous of levels that you can support Geekset and the Black Geek documentary. The two financial ways that you can support it is our Patreon. Everything that's from our Patreon is being repurposed straight towards the Black Geek documentary. So that's patreon.com/Geekset. With that does have different tiers, but it has different things that you get. You get early access to episodes and interviews. You get the opportunity to ask our celebrity guests questions. So we'll post it up and we'll read those questions to the guests. So you have that opportunity. We also get behind the scenes. Like I said, we've been posting a lot of the behind the scenes and what we're working on with the Black Geek documentary there. And you also get first viewing of like new shows and things that we're creating. So there's a lot of things there. And then also after you hit a specific month mark, you get free swag. Like you will get a shirt, maybe a hat, some medallions and stuff like that. We have different things that we cycle out. So our Patreon is one way to financially support it. The GoFundMe, to open GoFundMe. I'll send you the link, Adam, so that way you can put it in the description down below.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. But like that's a way that and it also has just a little bit more insight to the Geekset, to the Black Geek documentary. We did a GoFundMe trailer, so that's there, so to kind of give you a conceptualized visual version of what this documentary is going to be. So that's a way to financially support it. But if you don't have the means to financially support it, there's like 3 other major ways that we need support. Whether it's you see the Black Geek documentary, so you see this logo, you see us talk about it, you see me on the Soul Wizard podcast, jump in, support, watch, comment, like, that is huge, that visibility of it. Retweet, reposting, resharing, very, very huge. And using the hashtag Black Geek documentary, right? All those 3 is just as important as the funding of it, because what I realized, and again, this is us being new to this space, and that's why I'm loving this journey, because I don't want anybody to ever think that we're professionals with this yet. Like we have professionals behind the scenes to make sure that this is a high quality product, but us personally, this is our first big passion, major film type of project. So we realized lately that being on, like I said, the Soul Wizard podcast, and talking about it and sharing our vision with people is huge, because it gives more people more insight, and then people get interested in it. And then I start seeing the trail, because I'll see somebody, again, we're not the biggest group, so I see and read every comment. So I'll see somebody say something like, oh, on your podcast, like I'll look at the comments here and somebody will be like, oh man, this sounds cool. And then like I'll see them like, oh, they followed the Geekset Podcast page on Instagram, or they followed me on Twitter. So like I'm like, and because like I said, I'm reading everything. I'm like, oh, I recognize that name. That person was in the comments of Adam's podcast, right? And then I was like, oh, I get a random GoFundMe notification from that person. I'm like, oh, so I'm able to see people's trail of when you commented, when you learned who we were, stuff like that. So I was like, the visibility, more visibility of it. And again, I said, we respond to everybody. We're at this phase. Like it's funny because we're at this phase where there's people who know who we are, but we're at that phase of we still are of the people. Where it's like we're not so far disconnected where we're not responding to every comment and liking every comment and reaching out to people personally. And I don't know. For me, I love that journey. I love being able to have that conversation. Like the one of the biggest questions I often ask people, like, "Oh man, Geekset, I listen to y'all. How did you find us?" Like, I want to know how people found us, because it's like, again, we're not too far removed from that, where we still want to know how people got into us, what attracted you to us, what made you get there. So there's a personal connection that still happens with Geekset and throughout this whole process.
Very cool. Well, Deuces, I really appreciate your time. It sounds like you have a lot going on. I think we'll be keeping an eye on it because it's very cool. I love what you're doing, and I love the energy you're bringing, because you're going to need it to get all this stuff done.
Well, and first and foremost, man, like I want to say thank you again for having me on your platform. The one thing that I do love about blerd culture and geek culture, and I feel like we all do this subconsciously, is our attention to detail, right? And our attention to like research, right? And so like when we got into this space and when we started taking podcasting serious, one of the first things that we did was we said, let's figure out who's in this space, right? Let's figure out all the blurs, let's figure out all the geeks, let's figure out all of that, right? And so we legitimately just we did Twitter searches, Instagram searches, stuff like that. And we started figuring out who everybody was. And I think I got introduced to your podcast probably like maybe 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
That's awesome.
Right. And so it was like, the one of the biggest surreal moments of going down this journey and being introduced to people's being invited to people's platforms, like, yo, this is the podcast. Like, I remember this podcast, right? And so I like what you guys bring to geek community, and like, because it's 4 of y'all, right? If I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, there's 3 people kind of on the main show, then I kind of on the YouTube side of things.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things that is like, yo, like, I need people to realize who they are. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like I know that we get in our heads of like who we are. Like, okay, yeah, I still got work to do, but the So Wizard podcast is dope, man. Like, you know what I'm saying? And you guys got a really cool following. I've been, I'll see the people, repost y'all episodes or repost, y'all clips and stuff, seeing the comments, the community that you guys built. And so I thank you so much. It's the honor of being here for sure, man.
Oh, appreciate all the compliments. That's huge.
Yeah.
And hold on to our information. We can do it again, because you're probably gonna have a lot more projects coming out.
Oh yeah, and again, this is not a one-way street, man. And again, I know a lot of this usually happens in post or like when the cameras are off, but I told you I'm huge on amplifying voices, but I'm also huge on normalizing, collabing, and making and working with each other. And I've been telling everybody who's invited me on their platform, this is not a one-way street, meaning that if there's anything ever that we can do to help out, or anything that, on our platform that we can do, reach out. Even if it's something as small as just saying, hey, you know what, we posted this and we want to get a little bit more eyes on it. Can you guys retweet it? Let us know, and hit me up personally or whatever, and we got you, because I want that to be normal. I feel like we get in our heads like, oh, you don't do that. You don't. And I'm like, nah, I want to normalize that. If I need help, I'm going to reach out. If you guys need help, reach out. Like, let's normalize that. Let's normalize being supportive of each other. And also, even the small things. That's why I minimalize it to like retweeting, because I tell people, like, we are in this space. You'll see my post. I'll see your post. In our head, we acknowledge it. Like, oh man, that's pretty cool. But for whatever reason, we forget to like or comment. Yeah. And so I make it a point to, like, there'd be moments where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna spend this hour. Let me just go to all my people's that I know pages. Let me like whatever their most recent is. Let me throw a comment. Let me do a fire emoji. Let me say something. Let me interact with it, because though I'm supporting you by listening to it, I know how important to the algorithm and to the growth of an entity that it is that they see those comments and those likes. So it's like, I'm trying to normalize that. I want to be the change that I want to see. So I'm normalizing it, and I vocalize it on people's platform because I want them to know, like, hey, this is what I'm doing. So when you see it, this is what I'm doing. Join me on the journey, man.
I'd like to thank Deuces one more time for taking time out of his very clearly busy schedule to come on our show and talk about Geekset, the Geekset Podcast, the Geekset Podcast Network. I know unofficial, but I'm going to call it that. Their documentary that's coming out. And I think the merging of hip-hop and the geek culture is amazing. It's rooted there. It all makes sense when you follow it back, which is obviously something you just heard us talk about. It's really cool stuff. I look forward to talking to these guys more in the future. Make sure you follow Geekset, and also make sure you like and subscribe to this channel. We have a lot more new new interviews, new movie coverage, show coverage, Amazon Prime screeners from other studios, unboxings, comic reviews, so much stuff. You're not going to want to miss out. Also, make sure you listen to the So Wizard podcast every single week wherever you get your podcasts. So Wizard podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows, audio and video. We appreciate hearing feedback. We're always happy to talk to our fans, our listeners. So reach out, drop us a note in the comments, leave us something on social media. All the accounts will be found after the show and in the show notes. And on a more personal network, a good friend and I have an ongoing comedy comic series. It's called Social Studies. It's a slice of life comedy comic about a group of friends kind of finding their place in the world all through high school. We kind of look at the high school experience. We try to find the universals in it, and we write it like a sitcom. We keep it light and fun. 9 issues available now. 10 is coming any day now as soon as I hear from the printer. There's some supply chain issues. 11 and 12 are in the pipeline as well, so a lot of content coming your way. You can find it all at socialstudiescomic.com or online, Comixology, including Comixology Unlimited. Thanks.